Okay, welcome back to The Missing Link. We are another part of this white line saga, I suppose we'll call it, Steve. But thanks a lot for coming back and speaking with us. And we'd also like to welcome Paul Alsbury from the NHVR. How are you, Paul?
I'm very well. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good to hear.
I first met you in Adelaide, I'm pretty sure. At the conference down there, you'd sort of just started on your new role there, and you guys ended up being introduced to each other and started to work very closely with each other, which we're thrilled to see. I think that part of the thing with the regulator is so many people out there in industry all listening to each other and not actually listening to the regulator themselves and not asking the right questions and thinking that nothing's getting done about anything. And what we see is a lot of people are just scratching the surface of the little things when we go, no, it's so much bigger than that, and you don't see what's going on in the background. One of the things we find is that many people out there in the industry, especially truck drivers, think that you guys lay asphalt and fix roads. So we want to make that very clear to people that you don't do that. And you also don't construct parking bays. So we know that it's a big issue, and you guys know that it's a big issue. But the main thing we've got to look at is that you've got bigger fish to fry in other areas there. But you have to enforce the laws. So the roads may be damaging the trucks. It's extremely unfortunate, but we know that you aren't laying the asphalt, but your job is to make sure that the trucks are still safe on the roads. Probably the forefront for the NHVR will be the inspectors, and it all boils down to sometimes we do hear about inspectors being a bit heavy-handed, but or a bit unrealistic at times. But most of the time, we get very, very good feedback about the NHVR inspectors, which is great. And I think that that's very important there, because when the truckies get pulled over and they've had a bit of a day, they don't want to cop any crap. But also, if the inspectors have been copping or reaming from every truck driver that's gone through, well, eventually they're going to crack, because we're all human. True. Yep. So that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, look, few things in that. Firstly, our inspectors or our safety and compliance officers do a fantastic job. I actually every now and then have to review matters that have been the subject of complaints. And of course, often there's body-worn camera footage.
Yes.
I review that, and our SCOs, as we call them, our safety and compliance officers, they do a fantastic job, very professional. Even when they might be dealing with someone who's a bit elevated, who's a bit agitated, and look, we all have bad days, don't we? But they still remain professional and courteous, and they're just there to do their job. So I'm really proud of our SCOs. I think they do a great job. And look, we don't build the roads, and we don't build the parking bays. There's a lot we don't do in the system. It probably highlights one of the challenges for any regulator. It's certainly a challenge for the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. We operate in a system, we regulate in a system, but we don't do everything. So we have to make sure we work with other agencies, other regulators, law enforcement bodies, to make sure we're adopting a systems approach to how we regulate. So we can't ignore the agencies that build the roads and do the other things in the system. So that's very important, and that's one of the things we've been increasingly mindful of at the regulator, to engage with other agencies that work within the system.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you're going to ask me about sham contractors. It's a perfect example, isn't it? Because you've got the Taxation Office, you've got the Fair Work Ombudsman. They're all operating in that system too, as well as the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. So that's an example, a recent example where we've had to work with other agencies to adopt that systems approach.
Yes, yeah.
And that's really important, because whether we like it or not, the regulator also doesn't have total control over heavy vehicle access. Local governments and state agencies have a lot of control, and often, in my view, the NHVR gets stuck as the meat in the sandwich, but they cop all the blame. Yeah. There's a lot of people out there in the industry don't understand that reality. And I know the regulator works really hard to try and solve those access issues, but they usually have to try and do it by prevailing upon those road managers and road owners, which is a real challenge. But I've got to say too, Bruce, that since the NHVR came on board, and particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, it's been really evident that the inspectors, or SCOs as they call them, have a far more appropriate approach out on the road than used to be the case, and that some police still display. Because I think the impression I get, and I get a lot of feedback from operators, sure, there's a problem here or there, but the overall feedback is it's really good, it's fair and reasonable, and you can have the conversation. And one thing that you'll see NHVR officers do that you don't see police do anywhere near as much, if at all, is recognise that this is something that's not quite right, but the appropriate response is a bit of advice, or perhaps a warning, if you like, but not I'm going to hit you with the ticket straight away. Because I think they are going down a path of, despite the failed review of the heavy vehicle law, in our view, they really are focused on safety focus and risk-based focused.
Yes.
And because that's to us, that's the main game. And I think a good illustration of it is not that long ago the regulator took over New South Wales and inherited a lot of people from the RMS, just like years earlier they inherited people in South Australia from the South Australian Agency. And in both instances there's a transition phase as the officers who they picked up went through a process. Maybe some moved on, but they had to go through a process where they started to think differently, because the NHVR operates differently, in a better way. But it takes time, and people should take comfort in the fact that they all wear body cam.
Yeah.
And so long as you're being honest, telling the truth, because sometimes I get told furfies by people, if there's something to complain about, if you're genuine, the body cam footage will show it. But be careful, because if it's actually you that's done the wrong thing and you're trying to, present a different story, the body cam footage will show that as well.
Too right, it
So
does.
I think we're in a space where things are just going to continue to keep getting better. And over time, some of the rumour mill out there in the industry will gradually overcome it, which I think is one of the values of having these sort of discussions.
I think so too. Like I can think of 3 cases where we've been called in where a driver's come back to the company and said, oh yeah, they knocked me off for this, and the guy was a real pig and blah, 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 and carried on, and we've gone and confronted the regulator or one of the heads of the area, and they've actually shown us the CCTV footage, and you see the driver there with his hands going everywhere, yelling abuse at the inspector, and the inspector's actually been doing the right thing. So there's always 3 sides to a story, and I think people like to think that they haven't been turning around and bringing it on themselves, but we always talk about with getting pulled over by the police, failing the attitude test, and the same happens with the inspectors. They're out doing their job, and we've always, it's not always been perfect, but most of the time, any dealings that we've had with the regulator have always been very positive for us, and we go in and we discuss an issue with it that a company's having there, and it can get resolved, and sometimes it can't because it's the law.
Yep.
But if they've broken the law, so be it. But we have had really good positive feedback always from people that go in and deal with them the right way and know who to talk to. So it's not all as bad as what everyone makes out. And that's what we...
And what you just said is really important, Bruce. The single most important thing, in my view, is to be able to have the conversation.
Yep.
So if we're concerned that there's an issue, it might be an individual instance or it might be a general policy issue, so long as we can pick up the phone or send the email and engage and have the conversation, we won't always get the result that we're after, because maybe there's another side to it. And by the way, out there in industry, if you're going to ring me up and complain about something, you've been pinged for something minor, it actually helps if you tell me about the other 4 things you also got pinged for at the same time, because
Yes.
because I need to know that because we've got to be credible. But I'm finding, and be interesting to hear what Paul thinks, but I'm finding we're having a lot of good discussion at the moment that is identifying a number of things that we're working through to improve, the way things are done. And the ability to have those conversations is really important.
Yeah.
I've certainly found since I've been there for 16 months, it's an organisation that is open to continuous improvement. We do have those conversations with industry groups and others. We want to know if there's areas where we can improve, and we want to improve. So those sorts of representations are very, very important. They give us really good feedback. And, sometimes you do things a certain way for long enough, it just becomes a bit of a habit, and it's good to have someone shine a light on it and maybe suggest, well, perhaps you could do it another way, or perhaps that's just no longer relevant. We're open to looking at how we do things, streamlining what we do, and improving what we do.
Yeah, and I think the access bit that you brought up earlier, Steve, is a really big issue with people. I mean, the PBS system is amazing. We've got, we haven't got anywhere else in the world the amount of different configurations on the road as what we have in Australia. We're always looked at with a smile from truckers over in America at our road trains, but there's so many different configurations out there now. But access has been an issue. And access is only an issue because of the councils, nothing else. Some councils are fantastic and they'll play ball.
Yep.
Other councils can be very, very difficult to deal with there. And I think the one feedback that we hear from operators dealing with so many is, how come if this road's been opened up for, or has been given access, this company's got access for a truck and Quinn dog, for argument's sake, and then another company does, how come we've all still got to go through the same process and all have to go through the rigmarole? Why can't they just open it up? And I said, well, that's not up to the NHVR to open the road up either. That's up to the council to turn around and say, yeah, look, we'll blanket rule that area. So unfortunately, that's it. The same with bridges, because I know you've got to deal with the rail network if they're going over railway bridges. So that's a bit of a problem there. But that's probably one of the biggest things that we find, is everyone having to go through that same month-long process, or 2-month, or sometimes never getting an answer process.
There's a problem there that the regulator and the industry have to continue to struggle against, and that's the people in local government have got a challenge, because probably none of them get enough money for their roads to do what ideally they want to do, and so they have to protect the asset. But there's a fallacy out there in local government land, in my view, and that is, if I turn this permit that I've given to Bruce and Steve into a notice, then it won't just be Bruce and Steve and their trucks, it'll be Paul, and in fact all the Pauls, and the Freds and the Toms and the Dicks and the Harry, all the freight in the world will suddenly come and use that road. It's nonsense, because the freight is on that road because it's going from this customer to that customer, and that's the appropriate route. Opening something up with a notice is not going to attract more volume, but that's the understandable but ill-informed fear that a lot of local governments have. So they think, I can control the amount of use of that road by using permits instead of opening it up. That's a real problem. We've got to change it. And then we've got the problem with bridges, where they're protecting the life of the bridge and saying, well, yeah, we could let these heavier rigs over it, but that would shorten the life of the bridge, and the budgeting for the replacement of that bridge is 30 years out. What some of us have been saying is, on key bridges, bring forward the upgrade or replacement date for those bridges and allow better productivity, but that needs money.
Yeah.
But in all of that, the NHVR can have a voice, but they don't have the control.
Yeah, all the purse strings.
It's another example of the systems issues. We're not the only player in terms of access. We have to get better at the way we do access as a system. because wait times are too long. There's inefficiencies in the processes, but we need to bring everyone along in relation to those improvements. Technology and innovation are really sort of big in that space. How we can harness the technology to capture the information that's needed to be able to be more proactive in relation to giving access. So the regulator and others are working on that. A lot of smart people doing a lot of great work in that area. So watch this space.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people need to know is that because they always feel like it's just falling on deaf ears. So I think if the transport industry knows that there's something happening in that area and that gets brought up and it's addressed, that'd be great. I hate to say, but I mean, sometimes on social media, whoever's putting up your comments on social media and there's something there with showing a truck with an absolutely stuffed drag link and you see it as the inspector's moving it there and it's whack, 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 and they'll bring up a point about this is why pre-trip inspections are so important. And we're thinking, well, you can't do that on pre-trip inspection. That's not part of a pre-trip inspection. That shouldn't be raised. That's where people lose confidence and just go, you've got to be kidding. And that needs to be vetted by somebody who knows. There's a few smart people there in the NHVR that would know, even an inspector who's got a mechanical background and say, would you find this? Because I don't know anyone whose arms are long enough to turn the steering wheel and stick their head underneath the front guard of a bonneted truck and see that. But that sort of stuff comes up, and I think that the general public, the industry will look at anything they can to ridicule you at the moment. And so they see that and just go, I see, they've got no idea what they're talking about. And they're only little things, but that all has that impact, which is pretty tough. And then, of course, you get all the comments on there about, well, look what they've done with our roads, and off it goes. And you think, Just flick to the next thing there and read something else.
Well, I'm from Queensland, and
sorry about that.
I've learned to live with it, but we have, of course, the Courier Mail in Queensland, and I learnt very early on in the piece to stop reading the comments that people put on the Courier Mail website. So they can really ruin your day. Best not to read the comments. But seriously, look, regulators aren't perfect. As I said, we're open to looking at how we do things, to improving.
It's all in the delivery, though, isn't it?
Look, it's always in the delivery, and the challenge for every regulator is to just really look at how it communicates information.
Yeah.
That would have been put on our, and I think I know the one you're talking about. I think it might have actually come from a prosecution. But we want to educate, we want to inform.
Yeah.
It's to get that message across that, look, you need to make sure your vehicles are safe.
Yeah.
Before you drive them on the road. Messaging and the way we message is really important. So
we'll probably got lost in a bit of translation there. So
sometimes things do. And sometimes people focus more on the comments than the original message.
Yeah, read the story first.
It's always entertaining to read people's comments. Sometimes depressing, we keep looking at how we can better communicate information. We know that people, don't like reading hundreds of pages of information, for example.
Yeah.
So, how can we harness, digitisation, for example, to better communicate? And as I say, that's a problem with every regulator. I sympathise with regulators. Sometimes I have to go on different regulators' website, to sort of find out information, and you just sort of think, what they're dealing with is quite complicated. They're trying to communicate in a sort of easy to understand way, but sometimes the message doesn't hit. So we're constantly looking at how we can do that better.
I think there's an option there, and I've discussed it with some of your colleagues over the years and still am. One of the challenges, I reckon, and it's not just the regulator, it's government communicating with industry. People who work in any arm of government have to be a lot more careful and sometimes cautious about how they say certain things than I have to be as an industry rep. I can give a blunt message if a blunt message is needed because I don't have to worry about the political dimension of it, right? And I think there's often scope for regulators and other agencies in government to say, look, we're going to put this out. This is the official government position, but feel free, SARTA or any other association, to translate that, if you like, into truckie speak, to get rid of a lot of the stuff that we know people won't focus on or misunderstand. But we've got to do that responsibly and get it right. But I think there's a really good recent example, Paul, that we could mention without causing grief. We've had some discussion recently about because part of the some of the priorities of the regulator are educate, inform, right?
Yeah.
And they are higher priorities. Enforcement and so on comes later. And I can see plenty of evidence of them doing it. So I contacted them not long ago and said, when a penalty infringement notice is issued and it meets all the legal requirements, but the bit that talks about what the operator or driver did wrong is the appropriate legal description, but it's singularly uninformative. So a really good example would be there are many reasons why a driver, there are many ways in which a driver may not have recorded everything they need to record on a work diary. But using a single description of that on an infringement notice that says, failure to record what's required on a work diary, yep, legally that's right, but it doesn't tell that driver what it is they got wrong. And hence what they ought to change to avoid repeating that offence. Yeah. So I contacted the NHVR and said, look, is there a way we can look at doing this a bit differently? And, it's clear that they have to comply with the those codes that they use. One of my favourites is 20815, which is the failure to record. They're locked into that, but they're actually looking at the moment about how they can provide additional info. Yeah. Because the view I put to them, and it's a good example of what Paul said a minute ago about feedback. If you're wanting to reach out and educate and inform people, probably the best audience are the people who you've just found have got something wrong. Yeah. Right? So to the extent that government can, making that document more informative, here's the breach, and the reason is, for argument's sake, you didn't put the date on the work diary or whatever, right? Or you failed to sign it. Because a lot of the people who see those penalty infringement notices, if the reason they made the mistake was the human error that day, okay, they probably know. But if the reason is they were not clear on what their obligation is, on what the requirements are, then they don't know, and they still won't know after getting the infringement notice. They'll just pay the fine. Yeah. Right? So to their credit, the regulator, they could have said, well, piss off, Steve, this is the way we do it. But they didn't. They said, fair point, let's have a discussion, and they're working through a way to make that better. Yeah. And provide the info. That's just one little example of a number of discussions that are going on. And that's not me or SARTA helping big corporate truckies. That's us helping everyday truck drivers, right? But it's the sort of conversation that probably most truck drivers would never think of having with the regulator. They'd just, to put it bluntly, look at it and say, "What's this rubbish?" Or I don't know. Here's your money.
They're good at doing that.
Yeah.
Look, I've had guys come into fatigue courses and they've been driving trucks for over 30 years and had never completed a work diary and didn't know how to fill them out. Yep. And so you're educating them thinking, well, golly, they should know. And this is an industry failing to just think that, well, if someone's got a licence, they should know all this stuff. And we find that, companies that are not trucking companies, but they have trucks as part of their business, are the ones that really struggle with this because they don't realise what they have to do. And that's a really big downfall, that education process. And the answer is, oh, well, the instructions are in the front. But when you've got literacy issues and that type of thing, there's a failure there.
Well, and a big part of the responsibility there is with the employer or
Absolutely.
with the operator. So you're right. You can't just sort of give the diary across and say you need to fill that out and say no more. There's got to be some training. There's got to be some instruction.
Yep. And checking,
and
monitoring, checking, feedback.
And the nature of that training and instruction will depend on a lot of things. For example, if a driver's illiterate, it'll have to be done in a different way. If the driver has English as a second language, there might need to be some modifications.
Correct,
so that's really, really important. And I suppose it touches on one of the focus areas for the regulator. Yes, we do have our SCOs giving education and information on the roadside. But that's probably not the best way to provide education and information. We want to sort of provide it in a way that operators, employers can pick up on it, can use it, can use it with their employees. So we start to sort of focus on that happening at the depot before the truck gets on the road. So the education's done before the risk hits the highway, in effect. So that's sort of a big part of what we're trying to do at the moment. Really sort of focus on, providing those tools, the information, the education, to help that happen at the depot, not just on the roadside.
Yeah, right.
It raises an interesting question, though, doesn't it? And one of the challenges, I think, for people in industry is to understand how complex all of this can be and how difficult parts of it can be. You'll hear a common refrain, that they're just picking on truck drivers, or maybe they're picking on a few companies as well. When are they going to deal with the customers? The customers who are screwing us over, the customers who are forcing our drivers to sign a document that is getting that driver who did not load the truck, didn't even see it being loaded, and the trailer was curtain-sided, was already sealed when the driver got there to pick up that trailer. But some customers say you have to sign this to say the load restraint's done properly. Now, a lot of drivers, just to get going, will sign. The advice we give everybody is, if you didn't see it, don't sign it, or you write on the manifest, load unsighted, and then you sign it so you can get the hell out. A challenge for the regulator, and I'm not suggesting for a minute it's easy, but it's something that needs to happen, and I can see signs of it. We need an increased focus, in addition to managing the trucking operators and their drivers. We need the customer base to be getting more attention. And as it happens, I rang and had a meeting with the CEO of the Business Chamber of SA a couple of days ago, and I said, look, we've got a reformed or amended heavy vehicle national law and a whole bunch of changes. The Business Chamber, I'm sure, has thousands, because they've got something like 70,000 businesses that are members across different industries. You would have thousands of people who've got trucks that are 4.5 tonne or bigger.
That's right.
What's the bet? Most of them, and they're not commercial freight operators. But they're still covered by the law. Some bits of the law won't affect them or worry them at all, but other bits could. How about we work together? And I haven't done this yet because this has only just happened, but I'm going to try and set up a session involving SARTA, the Business Chamber and its members, and the regulator, to talk about those changes and start raising the level of awareness. But I'd like to see that conversation extend to getting that customer base to understand what their obligations are better than some customers currently do. And I'm personally convinced, Paul, that a key target group, because they'll be very interested in covering their own backside, are the directors of corporate customers. If they know and understand their exposure and understand it properly, we'll start getting better arrangements. I'll give you a simple example. A supermarket has got a board of directors, and they have to responsibly manage their transport activities. They might have their own trucks, but they've got thousands of truck operators' trucks coming and going, right? And they're keeping supermarket shelves full. There's a level of the organisation in supermarkets, a group of people called inventory managers. They've got one job: keep the bloody stock full on the shelves. Keep those potatoes coming. I'm running out of potatoes. Get the potatoes on the shelf. They have a singular focus on that, and they have almost no focus on the consequences of the demands they're creating about get those potatoes here.
Yeah, right.
And they probably don't see themselves as part of the chain, but their directors would certainly understand. And I think, even though it's difficult, I think a big part of the shift that needs to happen, because it's very easy to talk about, not so easy to do, but we've got to find ways to get to those and properly educate. Don't rely on the corporate lawyer for supermarket X to brief the board, because they will brief the board in ways that we've seen. They'll brief the board how to protect themselves, which, for example, is establish a compliance unit and micromanage your transport operators, but in a way that's not effective.
Yeah.
It actually creates more problems.
Yeah.
Right? I think, personally, apart from identifying where patterns of data show intelligence-led activity should happen against that operator or those drivers or that sector of the industry, apart from that, I reckon the main gain for a lot of stuff is in those parties in the chain that are beyond the steering wheel.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's not
truly.
easy.
And a lot of them just don't get it.
No.
So, Paul, your title
Yes.
at the NHVR is long. I'll let you say, because I'll mess it up.
It's not the longest title I've ever had, but it is pretty long. Executive Director, Statutory Compliance, which is basically overseeing prosecutions and our investigations and compliance unit.
Okay. And can I ask what your background is before you came to the regulator?
Yes. Well, look, I'm a lawyer by trade because, you can't go too far in a regulatory agency without finding lawyers.
Yes.
I did my apprenticeship, or back then called Articles of Clerkship, at a firm on the Gold Coast in Queensland, and went on to work for the DPP for quite a number of years as a Crown prosecutor. So I got to do all the sort of gritty criminal stuff like, robberies and rapes and murders, all that sort of stuff, all the interesting stuff, because it's sort of why I went into criminal law, because I wanted to do interesting stuff.
You would have met some real shit people, wouldn't you?
Look, you meet some very interesting people.
Yeah.
You meet some very interesting funny. I've done some family law too in the past, and you actually meet more interesting people doing family law, believe it or not.
No, it doesn't surprise me one bit.
That's a different matter. So I was at the DPP for quite a while. Did a bit of time overseas in the UK. I worked for the Food Standards Agency, and in terms of their regulatory work, they did a lot of stuff in the meat hygiene and dairy hygiene sector. So it's actually a wonder I'm not a vegetarian after seeing the stuff there. Worked at Transport and Main Roads in Queensland, which is where I was introduced to the heavy vehicle industry and heavy vehicle prosecutions. Then the Queensland Police Service in their legal section, the Crime and Corruption Commission, ICAC in South Australia, then Corrective Services in Queensland, then to the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. So,
Geez, you've had some broad experience then.
look, different sorts of regulatory enforcement, anti-corruption agencies. Probably the one thing they have in common is how vitally important information and education is in promoting compliance and bringing people back into compliance.
Yeah, right.
When you're a prosecutor at somewhere like the Director of Public Prosecution's office, the decision you have to make is quite binary. So you get a brief of evidence and you either decide to prosecute or not prosecute.
Yeah, right.
So when you're at an agency like the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, you have a toolbox of intervention options and compliance and enforcement options. So it's about making that choice about what option do you go with. So that's based on, what's happened, choosing a proportionate response, and choosing a fair and transparent response. So it's more interesting, I think, to be able to sort of have that toolbox with all those compliance and enforcement tools in. I think our people really enjoy working in that space and having all those tools to, promote compliance, move people back into compliance.
Yep.
Because it's only the worst of the worst that, really shouldn't be in the industry. It's those people who are in the high risk categories.
Yeah. That don't give a damn.
And you really just
the ones that are purposely trying to break the law.
Yeah.
Is where I struggle with it, because there's a lot of them that are doing their darndest to try and do it right.
Yeah.
And they might get caught out, and it can be a driver error, it can be a mechanical failure or something that hasn't been looked at properly, but you can see that they're a genuine mistake.
Yeah.
I was saying to Steve earlier, look, Brendan and I can go into a place and wouldn't know within a fortnight if that company's half decent or not. But I think the bit that makes it hard is when you see a company where a driver has stuffed up and then there's a 2-year investigation. And in that investigation, the company's actually come out pretty clean, but they've lost everything in the process because it's dragged on for so long. And I'd love to see that could get fixed in a much better way, because we've seen that happen more than once. Yeah. And companies have just gone belly up because they've lost contracts, they've lost everything, and it just drags on. And I know that you're governed by the courts, but there's some stuff that you look at and you just think there's not even a case here, but it's still going through.
That actually, and some of what you were just saying, Paul, raises, I can see the challenge for people in your role and in the prosecutions area, because judgments do have to be made, and as you said, do you prosecute or don't you? And maybe part of the issue out in industry is people only see and hear what they see and hear. They don't see and hear everything else. They don't hear the things that don't happen. And they react to that. One of the challenges, I think, is here's a company, and I could think of a number of examples, but it doesn't matter. It's the principle that matters. Here's an operator. Let's say they've got a number of trucks, a reasonable number of trucks, and they do a lot of loads in a year. But here's one load that was badly wrong, right? Major fail on load restraint or major fail on overloading, whatever it might be. But it's one. And a conversation I used to have with Sal Petrichetto quite a bit was centred around this point. So yes, that's serious, and clearly if somebody's been hurt or killed, then you're going to wear what you're going to wear. But if it's something that's been picked up, say at a roadside, it might be a weighbridge or a roadside check, but it's a significant fail, straight away the possibility is, well, we could prosecute because it's at the bigger end, and we'll do that, or look at the pattern in that business that does, just for argument's sake, they don't do 1 trip a week, they do 300 trips a week and thousands in a year, and the overall record is good. So what happened? Why did this go wrong? And what's best served in addressing this? Is it a prosecution or what? And sometimes, Paul, in the past, I've had the impression that part of the strategy is, well, if we prosecute, we'll get publicity and that'll send a message. And sometimes that makes sense. Like, here's a bad egg, and we're jumping on them, right? But how do you work through? And obviously there are things you can't say, but how do you work through that? I'd like to think that there's going to be an increased focus on looking at trends and patterns, and in forming that judgment, rather than that's a serious breach, bang, straight to court, go to jail, sort of thing.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of factors involved, and we're constantly improving our data holdings and how we use our data holdings. So, we're starting to get a pretty good picture of risk profiles of different operators. So, that's a relevant feature. Look, how serious the contravention is will always be a relevant feature, and I suppose in the the overloading space, it's is it an severe risk? And if it's not a severe risk, then generally it would be an infringement notice anyway. So that's going to be a relevant factor. Compliance history is also going to be relevant. So lots of relevant features. But I mean, that still has been a sort of serious sort of safety risk. Depending on the severity, there's a likelihood that would be prosecuted.
We can't seriously claim, look, I've only done it once, so let me off. And I'm not suggesting that, but it's, to me, and I accept it must be challenging for regulators to make these judgments, but to me, what I'm seeing in the industry is good people are saying, bloody hell, look, we get this right all the time, but here's one mistake and we're getting caned for it, really caned for it. I've had enough, because the human error factor is not accounted for. And it, to my mind, if a company's been doing the same task many times a week for many years, and this is the one failure, that says to me, well, there's not a system problem, but something else went wrong. Someone didn't follow the system or whatever it might be. And I think it would be good for people to understand that those things are considered, and it's not just a go straight to jail type.
If someone goes the wrong way in a car down a one-way street, you're not going to prosecute the person who put up the signs. You're going to prosecute the person that didn't follow the instruction. And that's what I think happens with truck drivers who have got all the instruction. We've got companies that really are very, very good, even for family-owned companies, do beautiful jobs when it comes to the systems they put in place. They spend a lot of money on their compliance, they reinvest it constantly, but then the driver fucks up and then the company's still the one that cops that up the backside, and that's the bit that we find a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I think in that example, one highly relevant factor, I think, is how the company responds. So, what happened? Why did it happen? Is there anything in our policies and practices which, increase the chances of it happening? If it was an employee who didn't follow the rules, how are we going to deal with that employee? I'm not saying you sack them or anything like that.
Just some sort of disciplinary action rather than just ignoring it and letting it go.
Or training
or counselling or like a warning, whatever. It'll depend on the circumstances. But taking it seriously, a sort of critical failure or a failure, something's happened that's led to that contravention, as opposed to just going, oh, whoops, look, it's never happened before. It's probably just a sort of, it'll probably never happen again. Let's just sort of forget about it. So that wouldn't be the best way to sort of deal with that.
Yeah. And we've
Yeah.
got to focus on not just what has happened, but is there a risk of it happening again? And what's being done to prevent or mitigate against that?
So have they held a toolbox meeting as a result and tried to re-educate everyone? Have they just spoken to that one driver? Have they put out memos to everybody? Have they done any of that?
Yep.
What I would say required stuff, re-educate, don't just let it go.
Yep.
That's all about investigating and re-educating, not just letting it go.
That's right.
Yeah. Tell me, since the White Line case, and we'll focus back on that because this is what Steve had made very clear that from his initial discussion with you that there'd been some changes that were made and that he was actually thrilled with the fact that you would listen and wanted to work with him on this. And obviously with someone like Steve who's constantly trying to get improvement out of the in the industry for operators there, to have someone from a regulator turn around and say, yeah, well, let us work with you, was very important to him and important to all of us that know him. So what changes have been made with what you saw, the way that the White Line were dealt with there?
And just to clarify, I wouldn't say it's probably not fair characterisation to say that changes have been made and I'm happy with those, and not that it's up for me anyway, but it was clear to me that there was an awareness that there's room for improvement and changing some things, but we haven't got down to change this, change that at all. But I'm conscious that the regulator is looking at how it can do things best to try and achieve the outcomes. One of our major concerns has been if there, and using that case as an example, if there's a safety concern with a company, then I think we're all required to try and solve that safety issue sooner rather than later, notwithstanding that behind that there might be legal matters proceeding that need to be pursued. But the engagement with operators to identify what the issue is or clarify it and move ahead, because safety on the road should be the number one priority. And when Paul and I and others talked about that, there was no pushback. It was an open mind. So we're from our point of view, we're hopeful that whatever's being worked on will lead to that. But we've got to accept the reality. There will still be prosecutions, and there needs to be. But I get the sense that there's a sort of a broader approach, if you like, in the offing. But
Well, look, I won't talk specifically about the White Line matter.
Yep.
I'll do the lawyer's squib, and so I won't talk about a specific matter. Look, when I was a young prosecutor, my boss sort of told me, look, you have learnings from even the ones that you win. So if you finish a case and you haven't learnt anything, if you haven't thought, probably should have done that a bit differently or done this a different way, then you're sort of kidding yourself. So there are always learnings, and we're constantly looking at how we can improve. In a nutshell, in relation to a prosecution, we rigorously apply a test of, are there reasonable prospects of securing a conviction? That's just not an NHVR test. That's pretty much every enforcement agency in the common law world.
Yeah.
The second bit of that test is it in the public interest to commence the prosecution? So our prosecution team is very, very focused on that discipline of that decision making in relation to a prosecution. Obviously, that involves sort of looking at the brief of evidence you've got, clarifying any evidence that might be unclear, and looking at it from a completely independent lens. Independent of the investigators, whether they might be our internal investigators or investigators from one of the police services, just being completely independent and that is one of the most important disciplines of a prosecutor.
And you'd have a Chinese wall between your I think that's what they call it, between your prosecutions people and your investigations people.
Oh, look, they talk.
Yeah.
They talk. They, and it's not uncommon for prosecutors to say to an investigator, "Oh, look, can you go and get a statement from this person? You know, that's missing in the brief, or can you just clarify this?" So that all happens, but in terms of the decision making, it's the prosecutor's decision.
Yep.
So much so, we're so committed to that discipline that the head of prosecutions is the decision maker, is the ultimate decision maker.
Right.
If I said to him, I don't agree with that, do it another way, he gets to say to me, hear what you're saying, but it's my decision.
Yeah.
Yep.
And look, that's very important to have that independence. Look, there's a lot of other changes that we've made. Not directly in relation to white line. In our investigation space, we've made quite a few changes in that space. Often, or more often than not, our investigations emerged from an incident where there might have been a fatality or a serious injury, or for some other reason it was a serious incident. We're still doing that, but we're also focusing on more proactive investigation. So looking at our data holdings and looking at operators that are in that higher risk category, and doing proactive monitoring and investigation work. So that's a shift in focus because at the end of the day, we want to prevent serious incidents happening.
Yeah.
So that's actually a shift to safety and risk-based focus, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah, and look, one of the amendments to the heavy vehicle national law that we expect to come in the middle of the year relates to improvement notices. At the moment, under our legislation, if we issue an improvement notice for a contravention, we can't then go on to prosecute.
And that's a major problem.
Look, it's and as far as I know, it doesn't exist for other regulatory agencies, that impediment. So and you can see the issue. An improvement notice is about managing the risk there and then. We all know how long some prosecutions take. So you know, if you're waiting 18 months for a prosecution to resolve in relation to a risk that happened 18 months ago, well, that's not satisfactory if you're relying on the prosecution as your principal risk management tool. The other thing we're bringing in is a systems assessment function. So not investigators, they're people with a different set of skills, and in relation to high risk operators, going in and just having a good look at their safety management systems. And I know there's not a legal requirement to have a safety management system, but the systems, processes, practices that they have in their business to manage risk.
And there will be a legal requirement for a lot once the new law starts, if they want to be accredited.
Yes. Well, look, and look, I hope I'm not saying anything too controversial, but I often think, you know, if you don't have a safety management system, whether it's called a safety management system or it's called something else, how are you discharging your primary duty, your primary safety duty under the heavy vehicle national law? So I'll leave it at that. I'll just leave the question hanging.
It's a good question. I think one of the things that we find, being consultants and going into companies and setting them up, we're amazed at times how many people still don't really know what we're talking about. And they, I've heard about that stuff. They just don't really understand it. And I think that education of the industry is a really big thing. They have to understand the importance. We push it all the time. When we did our Road to Compliance masterclass that we did, it actually was to try and educate and explain to people what they need to do and why they need to do it. You know, it wasn't a selling point for anything. It was to try and explain to them, you actually got to do this, and you'll be sorry if you don't, because if you have an incident that can happen to anybody at any time and you haven't got your ducks in a row there, it's over. There's no coming back after the event.
Yeah, well, and look, it's all about managing the risk before it gets out onto the road. Our CEO, Nicole Rosie, was quoted in a story recently, and I'll paraphrase, I won't get the quote right, but she said something like, you know, if we're dealing with the risk of like whether it's sort of brake issues or whether it's sort of fatigue issues, when it's already out on the road, then really, you know, whether it's sort of life or death is just a matter of luck.
Yep.
You know, it becomes luck. And look, it's amazing how often we have good luck in relation to that, to, you know, so sometimes we're just really, really lucky, but sometimes we're not. And, you know, what we're here about, one of the big things that occupies our minds is preventing deaths and serious injuries from heavy vehicle incidents. And look, I know and, you know, recognise that not every accident involving a heavy vehicle is the fault of the heavy vehicle driver. So I accept that at once.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'll just get in another bit of information in relation to our proactive work. It's work that the SCOs do, and that's the Operator Intervention Program. So it works with medium risk operators where their compliance history indicates that there's sort of something happening, something sort of not working in relation to, you know, controlling certain risks, whether it's fatigue, whether it's mechanical. So they go in and provide education and information to prevent that operator from moving into the high risk category. That's really important proactive work that the regulator's doing.
But
They consider they're crossing a line a bit and they're trying to pull them back.
See, that's a big shift, and that's the sort of stuff that Darryl Fall used to do when he was at heavy vehicle enforcement. He would look at the evidence that they were seeing out on the road and recognise that organisation is appearing more than others in relation to a particular problem, and he'd go and knock on the door and, you know, say he'd like to have a conversation. Sometimes he got shown the door, but he would sit down, and what you were saying, Paul, I think is really important, that, you know, going in and looking at, in a collaborative way almost, looking at operators' systems, whether they called it an SMS or not, and sensible operators would welcome that and work with you, because at the end of the day, apart from a very small percentage, I suspect, they actually want to keep in business, and they actually don't want to see you. They don't want you on their case. They don't want to see any of your paperwork other than here's your new accreditation, because you're happy that they're getting it right, and the evidence is they're getting it right. So that's exactly the sort of shift that we're talking about at SARTA, that 95% of the work is not the roadside intervention. It's the more proactive stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it was 5 years ago I first said to the regulator, because I rang one of Paul's colleagues and said, why not issue, a bloke who's not there anymore actually, and I said, why not issue an improvement notice? And he said, because if we do, we can't prosecute. So if we think there's any likelihood that we might need to prosecute, we can't issue an improvement notice, which puts the whole bloody thing of solving the on-road problem off until a decision's made about prosecuting, which is nuts. And I said, well, we need to change that in the Act. And if that's changing so that the regulator, or has changed, so the regulator could now issue an improvement notice to try and fix the problem that needs fixing, notwithstanding that there might still be a prosecution coming because of what's happened, you know, earlier, that's actually a huge improvement if our focus is on safety.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. A really good thing. We and there's that many individual cases you can imagine, but one I saw the other day, sometimes I see them and they make my hair stand on end. And I saw an operator who, he was only fairly new at it. He was driving a float for a company and got pulled over. And he got 2 infringements, and one was over mass, right? He had a float, but he had a divisible load on the back there, had 2 machines on the back. So he got done for mass. It was like $163,000 fine, which I still think the fines are a bit mind-blowing. But the other thing, he had the oversize over mass gazette and still thought that he'd done it right. He didn't realise about the divisible load. He's learning the hard way. But the other one was there was the oversize, the oversize one, sorry, for the dimension, but he wasn't carrying that piece of paper. Now he's on a float, but he measured at 20.8 metres long. But because he didn't have the bit of paper, they pulled him back to 19 metres and knocked him off for 68 grand for that.
Before Paul answers, I've got to jump in. To me, and that's an old story I've heard 100 times in my 32 years. He didn't have the piece of paper. In court, often a lawyer will say, well, Your Honour, he didn't have the piece of paper, but it's the only thing he got wrong. If he'd had the piece of paper, it would have been okay, it would have been safe, and he wouldn't have been pinged. Most magistrates will say, well, what are we here for? One of the frustrations, you do have to have the piece of paper, but what's the appropriate response when something like that's occurred? The load, the operation or whatever it is actually compliant and safe, but for a piece of paper, which quite often now you're allowed to have electronically anyway, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's the sort of stuff that just turns the industry against regulators and government, because what's being achieved, we're not librarians, we're truck operators. So I'm not sure what...
And I've got to say, the gear was immaculate. It was restrained beautifully. Everything that I saw in the photographs, it was mint.
Yeah.
And rather than giving him a $163,000 fine to say, well, it should have been a divisible load, to say, well, you've got an option. We're going to give you a massive fine, or you can drop your second machine here, go to Melbourne and deliver your first one and come back and get it. It's going to cost you enough as it is. We won't fine you, but here you're going to learn the hard way. To me, that would be probably a kinder way to do it, to say, well, because really, if that wasn't a divisible load, he was still quite legal on the road there and well underweight for a quad float. So he was quite okay. It wasn't that he was going to kill anyone in the process, because it wasn't unsafe.
So my question in those sort of circumstances is, what is the purpose of that piece of paper? And I suspect the correct answer is to show anyone who inquires, including people in uniforms, that they are allowed to do what they're doing. They've got an approval. So maybe another option, Bruce, is, hang on a sec, I'll just get the office to email me a copy of that piece of paper to demonstrate that we've got the approval. But maybe there needs to be another level of fine which smacks you for not having the piece of paper, and it smacks you enough to encourage you to get the piece of paper in future, but it doesn't burn you for threatening the integrity of the infrastructure because you weren't doing that, right? You weren't that massively overloaded or whatever. I always come back, and I've talked with Paul and others about this often enough. I ask this question, what's the purpose of a fine? And I believe the purpose is not vengeance, it's to change behaviour so that people do the right thing next time. And Paul talked about, one of the things they consider with prosecuting is the appropriate proportionate response. And I suspect that over time, with the changes that are being made, the SCOs and other grassroots operators will shift a bit on some of that, I hope.
I don't know about that matter. The 167,000 would, I suspect, be the maximum fine that you get if you go to sort of court. And you would have to be in the absolute worst category of offending to get a fine like that.
Yep.
So
They're written on there as maximum fine, but that's what scares the crap out of any operator when they read it.
Yeah, and look, was the operator charged or the driver?
The operator.
The operator, yeah. So there's also there's a multiplier of 5 for corporate defendants, which is why maximum fines start getting pretty high when you're dealing with a company. But look, as I said, I don't know about that matter. What I do know is it's not a choice of you either cop it or run a hearing. You can always make representations to our prosecutions unit, who will consider whatever you have to say, consider any mitigating circumstances that you want to raise. That's an important part of any prosecution's function, to consider submissions that are made by people who have been charged or who may face charges, and just take into account what they have to say about the matter. It may be as I said before, the public interest test is one of the tests.
Could you explain that? Because most people hear that and say, well, what does that mean, public interest?
Yeah, look, the public interest test, so what that's about is whether it is in the public interest to progress a prosecution. So, it's a test that they have, in all common law jurisdictions in relation to prosecutions. So there's a range of factors, and keep in mind that these sort of policies, like the New South Wales DPP have one, the Queensland DPP have one, so they relate to all sorts of offences. So it relates to a break and enter, or a robbery or something like that.
Prosecuting a 93-year-old on a murder charge when maybe nothing's going to be gained by it.
Well, the age of an offender,
Yeah.
or an alleged offender, is one of the factors to take into account. But things you look at in applying the public interest test is it a trivial or minor or technical offence? What's the outcome that prosecuting a matter is going to achieve? Has the alleged offender taken steps to rectify the non-compliance? There's a range of factors which relate to the personal circumstances of an alleged offender, so age, they might be sick, those sorts of things. So I can't remember all the sort of factors in the list, but those sorts of things which I suppose give context to what happened, and require you to look at sort of the actual seriousness. Because look, it has never ever been the case that a prosecution agency has to prosecute you for every offence that's sort of detected. And look, that stems, I suppose, from the fact that if that was happening, then the courts would be clogged. Justice wouldn't really be served by occupying a court's time with trivial type things.
Let me ask a question that I know mobs of people in the industry have a view. I have a view about whether or not they're right, and that is, look, you've just got quotas and you've got to chase quotas and you've got to raise money, and so you issue all these fines. It is a popular refrain in the trucking industry for people to say they hit us with all these fines because they've got to raise money, and I did make inquiries at the NHVR, and I think people would be surprised to find where the money actually goes, and it's not the NHVR. But I think it's an impression that's out there that is often, unfortunately, used by people to dismiss the importance of things and say, right, this is all bullshit, we'll just ignore it and hope we don't get caught. So to the extent you can, your SCOs aren't out there with quotas that they have to chase, and there aren't financial targets for raising money through fines, right?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yep.
It just doesn't happen. Look, nothing would make me happier if we weren't issuing any fines and weren't prosecuting anyone. I may well be out of a job. Well, they may sort of show me the door, but look, we want people to comply.
Yeah.
Because and complying with these things is important. Yes, I know there are some offences which people think, oh, that's just an administrative offence and what have you. And some things are administrative in nature, but, some things, even some record-keeping obligations are important. Look, at the end of the day, we're trying to reduce road trauma, because we don't want to, we don't want to see people dying on the roads.
I don't like throwing curly oddball ones at you there, but sometimes there's some that just leave us a little bit gobsmacked. We can normally justify why a company's being fined, and we've worked with lawyers enough in this to see how they think. And so we can, to the point that we can explain. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean that we can therefore explain it to a transport company and say, well, and I'll always say to people is, if you go to court, there's no such thing as a grey area. A barrister's going to make it black or white very, very quickly. And that's what they've got to remember. So don't say, oh, yeah, but. And even this morning, I was explaining to Steve earlier, I had a company contact me, and there was an argument going on within the company where they wanted to carry bulker bags of sand, so 1 tonne bulker bags, inside the back of the tipper. They're going, do we have to restrain them? And I said, well, if you can, yes. And they're going, oh, yeah, but one of the arguments was, well, if there's 15 tonne of sand in the back of it there, that's not restrained, it's just got a tarp over it. Why have we got to tie them down? And I said, well, from my point of view, if you can restrain them, and they said they're down below the surface, just below the gunnels of the tipper. And I said, yeah, but I said, there's still 1 tonne bags. And I said, so to me, you should still have a strap across there if there's a provision for you to tie it down. There's no provision, well, you can't, you at least have the tarp out, but it's in the event of an impact. It's not just driving along the road. So what's going to happen if a 1 tonne bag gets thrown out, runs across the road, cleans a car up, puts it into a pole and kills someone? My life is full of hypotheticals because we see that stuff happen that often. You know it can happen.
And look, that's part of risk management, isn't it? You don't just operate your business on the basis that everything's going to go exactly to plan.
I operate a business so everything's
opposite.
going to go terribly wrong. And so what are we going to do to prevent that? So, we always talk about worst case scenarios, always. And I always say, forget the fine, consider the consequence. Don't worry about getting somewhere without getting caught. Worry about what happens if you have an accident on that trip. What's going to happen? And I think that's what people need to consider worse, and that's what workplace safety people do. And they consider what could go wrong. I think workplace safety is probably a little bit overdone out here compared to the rest of the world, but you know what? They're trying to make sure people go home. And so we might say it's overdone, but on the other hand, it might be that we've got a better success rate of keeping workers safe and the general public safe as a result of that. I have got one odd one for you.
Oh, okay.
And I threw this one to Belinda Hughes some time back when it happened, and also to Wayne Whitmore and a few other key people there when it happened, because I didn't know what to say. So we've a company we deal with, a girl who works with our business, very, very good at record keeping. The driver, 32-year driving, had I'm going to call it a clerical breach, but a fatigue breach in his work diary. And then 2 days later did it again. So he'd done under 12 hours both days. This guy knows how to switch with BFM and standard, which not many do. He's very good at it. But he just made a mess up. He got into a job very, very early in the morning. And so he had about an hour's wait before he got loaded and took off. And then he did about 9 hours, and then he had a 15-minute break. So he breached in that. He'd still done under 12 hours for the day. 2 days later, he did it again. So our girl's discovered it in the office when she's done it. She's called him in. What have you done? He's going, I can't believe I just did that. You never find problems in this guy's work diary ever, right? And so she did a non-conformance. On the comments section, wrote down the non-conformance number and what it was about to say that there was an acknowledgement there had been picked up, circled it, signed it. She did it all herself to say that it was in there. She also put out a memo to all of the drivers. Guys, please be assured that if you have a break early in the morning, it can mess up your times. It's an any period of. And then on top of that, they did a toolbox meeting 2 weeks later, brought it up at the toolbox meeting. About a week or so after the toolbox, he got pulled over up at Mount White. There was a blitz, and the police were there. Highway Patrol came up. This guy's a really nice guy. And, hey, mate, how are you? Good. And he said, I want to have a look at your licence, logbook, etc. And he goes, all right. And he said, you're going to actually find a couple of breaches in there. And he said, oh, what happened? And he explained what happened. And he showed him where it was, here and here. And he said, the girl in the office kicked my backside for it. And she's written it down and acknowledged it, and she did a non-conformance there, and he went, oh, right, he says, we're going to have to fine you, isn't it? And he still copped 2 fines, one for each of them. And I'm thinking, the only thing that I could say to someone then is if you make a mistake, because you can't alter it, because that's fraud, and that's 13,310, the only thing I can say to them is, mate, get rid of it and get a new one, because otherwise you're going to get knocked off. The company was doing everything right. The driver got his butt kicked. Why fine him after the event?
Yeah.
Just before Paul answers, there's a dimension to that with safety cam. I've been arguing for some years that safety cam's a good system. I think it can be used better, and there's discussion going on with the regulator about that. But in a very similar vein, given that the notices to produce because of workload issues come out usually well after the event, right? So the company submits the required documents, including the work diary, and the regulator spots a breach. But it's a breach that either the company was unaware of and haven't done their job and haven't managed it, or it's a breach that they've actually spotted, dealt with, retrained the driver to fix the misunderstanding that they had, and the subsequent records show the driver has not reoffended. What then is the point of fining a driver 6 to 9 months later? It's the same sort of thing, but to me, we should be trying to encourage companies to manage and use NCRs and retraining to improve, but they see a process of, well, you're going to get fined anyway, is making it pointless. And so they throw their hands up. I actually think that's a bit of a dilemma for the regulator, and an area where we can actually improve and foster more proactive real-time management within companies to spot and fix issues. And the reward is, well, okay, we're not going to fine the driver because the purpose of the fine, change behaviour, has already been met. Now, that's easy to say when you're outside a regulator, right? But that's our view on it. And I know safety cam's not in Paul's area, but it's the principle of it that I think, to me, it's consistent with the improvement notice type approach.
I can definitely see your point, and I know you were being tongue-in-cheek when you sort of said about throwing out the work diary and getting a new one.
I was actually being honest, but yeah, that's
well, that's not something I would recommend.
We never encourage that, because that's a common thing that happens. But I can't see anything else you could do. The only thing that Bill said to me at the time was the driver could always take it to court. And I said the only time this guy's ever been to court was when his ex-wife took him for everything that he owned. I don't know if he wants to take his chances, because a lot of guys live from week to week.
Yep.
And so it was just a really hard call on what to say. So yeah, I probably would be slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I don't know what else to say.
Look, reasonable minds sometimes differ in terms of, should I issue an infringement notice, should I not? Look, let's just say I have a bit of sympathy for the fellow in that example that you've given.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's not really anything you could do, though, is there?
Well, he could have made a representation. He could have written in a letter in relation to that. It sounds like from your so that's police. Yeah. Look, I'm not quite sure how we deal with representations in relation to police issue infringement notices.
You'd have to hope you had a magistrate in court that was sympathetic if you took it on.
I did have a suggestion, and I actually drew it up, and I sent it up to Wayne Whitmore, and when he was working there, and a couple of others, and it was a separate page to go into the front of the work diary, which was a clerical error acknowledgement by the company, and it was numbered from 00 to 99, so half of them on one side, half on the other, and it had down the date, what was found, the non-conformance or other number, and then a signature of who it was that signed it, so that hopefully a police officer did pull them over, or an inspector, they went along and said, oh, you've actually got a mistake here, you've left this out on page 38, and could go back to the front and see 38 and was acknowledged back there a day or two later, and it had been signed, and there was an insight. If they wanted to investigate it further, they could, let the driver go. But I think it was going to cost too much to print an extra page. I'm not too sure what it would go was, but that was it's not in legislation, you can't put it in, but surely there had to be something. And that was the only thing I could come up with. Surely there could be a way that the company could show we've acknowledged this, and the administration person is putting their ass on the line by signing it, but they've done it. That was my hope.
Yeah. Well, look, that's not a bad idea. Obviously, couldn't. I'll just ask our policy people to listen to this podcast. They can hear it. Look, obviously
everyone's trying to get it right. People make mistakes.
Yeah.
And it was just a harsh fine. That was it. And I just didn't have an answer to it, mate.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that system would have to have a limit. Otherwise, you could just sort of just keep doing it. And so I'll just fill out the front of the book.
Well, that's what I'd be worried about. If someone said, well, what if they say to the driver, I'll just go through there and then we'll just write out an option.
But that's where the intel starts to kick in, because more and more your data holdings are improving and becoming more comprehensive. And I can envisage a time where you'll be able to see, at least as far as NHVR activity goes, maybe not SAPOL, that or any other police department, that this driver has had 2 infringements detected and managed or worked on by the NHVR in the last 8 years, and they're both at the lowest end of very minor. Something happens. Yep, okay, he's human. This is the explanation, compared to here's a driver where there's a pattern that shows that he's either a really slow learner or doesn't give a rat's, and or the scale of the breaching is higher, and so we're going to take tougher action. So to me, the intelligence-led approach could apply ultimately to drivers as much as it applies to companies. I don't see any reason why not, in principle, because humans do occasionally make mistakes.
Especially blokes.
Yeah, but we can't encourage people to keep saying I'm human and I made a mistake again.
Yeah, and they can't be just a get out of jail free card.
No. But honestly, Paul, there are, and you know this, Bruce, there are that many good drivers who are just saying, I've had this. I'm going to the mines. I'll drive their big dump trucks until they're all fully autonomous. Because up there I don't get pinged for the occasional inconsequential, from a safety point of view, mistake. And it's difficult to strike the right balance. And if it's purely anal, black and white, don't care what happened, mate, or why, I'm booking you, which is probably more of an attitude of some police than it is of NHVR and SCOs. But we've got to remember it's humanity that's involved, not robots.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and look, I mean, infringement notices have been around for quite a while now. Originally, they were sort of like, this is a way to deal with something without going to court. But I think fines can be quite high in relation to infringement notices. So I think that's the kicker.
Yep.
It's still a streamlined process. You don't have to go to court. You can resolve something by paying a fine and not going to court. I think what makes them even more painful with the cost of living as it is today, it's just another expense that people have to bear.
I think, Paul, and ever since I've done the podcast, it's been a thing that I've always raised, that I can't stand the clerical error fines there. That top section's $880. So if a driver forgets to mark New South Wales, he's marked it every other frigging day, but it's an $880 fine.
Yeah.
It's got the little instructions in the front that if Sarah is written down Gunawara, but she accidentally misspells it as gonorrhea, well then she's okay, because the officer knows that's what she meant to say.
Yeah.
So it's almost a contradiction there, but they can get knocked off, or as you said about the date being 1 day out or whatever.
Or the date's on the previous page, the date's on the following page, but the date's not on this page. But the 2 other dates are 1 day apart. It's pretty clear that what the date should be. A good officer will say, mate, you need to fix that and not do it again. A not so good officer will say, here's your $800 fine. And the driver goes, bugger me.
And look,
and in all fairness, the NHVR inspectors are known, because we do a lot of fatigue training, are always saying, the NHVR guy was good. He just said, a couple of pages back there, you just missed something, mate. That's doing it well. That's why they're respected.
Yeah.
And look, I was going to raise that because we do a lot of education in that way. The other thing is I do wonder if that's one of the offences for which the fines are going down under the amendments. I've got my document in the other room that sort of tells me what fines are going up and what fines are going down. So
there are some going down, but there are just as many going up. And in our world, Paul, we'd like to see all of the admin type clerical breaches, if they are of a nature that has no tangible or credible impact on safety, they should be treated much lower. But again, recidivist repeat behaviour, a scale type approach might be better. Because if you're a truck driver and you're getting $1,500 or $1,800 a week, and you do trips that take you away for 4 or 5 days at a time, and in the first 2 hours you get fined $800, doesn't do a whole lot for your mindset for the next 3 or 4 days while you're out on the road, because you've just lost so much of your wage that living for the next week or fortnight becomes difficult.
I raised that with a gentleman who used to run around to a lot of events there, representing the Highway Patrol.
Yeah.
And that came up, and I just said to him, we're at a conference, and I said, that's just happened to a driver who's just had 3 clerical errors there, and it's cost him $2,400. I said, how many, coffees with a cop in phone cups, Blend 43, do you reckon he's going to have before he's calmed down?
Yep.
I said, so you're all worried about mental health of drivers and that type of thing, and then this guy's hopping back into a 68-tonne vehicle, and you don't know what's going on in his personal life there. Is he going to go and use it as a weapon and just say, I'm done? I'm done. So I think that there's a little bit of contradictory stuff there. But look, there's always going to be, like I said, those individual little stories there aren't really the right ones to raise, because it's more the ones that are happening as a collective. And I think that Steve and I are on the same page. We'd love to see the industry just improving for the drivers out there, to keep them in the industry, not walk, like you were saying. And I like to think, Paul, that Steve had said that you've been terrific for him to work with, which is a really good thing, because you listen. And we just need the industry needs the NHVR to listen and take on board, not just say, well, bad luck, that's the law. And I've turned around and said, well, the laws have changed for it. Why can't we change it back?
Even if the conversation doesn't result in agreement, having the conversation is critical. And because if you don't have the conversation, nothing's going to change. But it is very good to know that, and Paul is not the only one. There are a number of people in the NHVR that we talk with at SARTA, and we've got a lot of good dialogue. And I think if industry understands that that's going on, and I'm sure there are other associations, I'd be amazed if we're the only ones. I'd be upset if we were, but I don't hear my colleagues talking about it. I talk about it with them because I'm trying to encourage them to get onto the same process if they're not already. But I think if industry knows that there is discussion and various things are getting tweaked, adjusted, and overall, the knowledge base is improving. And I have a view that the more that NHVR officers understand the industry and how it operates, the better. Doesn't mean they have to like everything, but that helps as well. Because often there's a reality that means that something that looks like it should be simple and straightforward is not so simple and straightforward out in the real world. And, that's another constant refrain that you hear in the industry. So I think the more we can increase dialogue and communicate and publicise, the better, because we have a view at SARTA that we need an NHVR that's effective and reasonable and collaborative, but they've still got the sharp stick that they can use if they need to. We need that as an industry. What we don't need is an ongoing war between industry and the regulator. That's counterproductive in the extreme, right?
Especially now when it's so tough.
Yeah.
We might wrap it up there. I really appreciate you coming along to this. Do you reckon we can get you on again from time to time? Would that be okay?
Absolutely, more than happy to come along. I know where it is now. Had a bit of trouble finding the place, but
It's out in
I
the
made
middle
it.
of nowhere,
Yes,
virtually,
it
but,
is. It
yeah,
is.
it looks a deceiving. You probably thought, I wonder what they're dumping in that driveway there. But here we are. So, no, Paul, I really appreciate you coming along. It's been great to have you on. This is very early days for the missing link, but we just hope to educate industry. There might be some tough questions, but just asking, and it's all about education, not throwing stones at anybody there. Everyone's got to work together.
Yeah, and look, we're committed to working with industry. We know that it's a fast-changing industry. Like everything's changing so quickly. We need to change also. That's every regulator needs to be responsive to what's happening, the context, the motivators that industry has, the pressures, all those sorts of things. So, we try our best to be on top of those things.
It was a great discussion, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.